The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much. We're so happy to have you all be with us today. Grateful that you could join us today. It's been a little bit since we've had a webinar. We had a little bit of a technical difficulty in October, and we had to cancel our webinar in October. So we are just thrilled to be here today and so happy to have you with us. I'm here with Kayla Jessop. Kayla will introduce herself in just a few minutes. We have just a little bit of a few things that we need to go over before we get going on the webinar, and then we'll have Kayla jump right in. So I'm going to go ahead and run over a couple of housekeeping items, and then we'll jump right in. So on your screen, you'll see a couple of points that we need to go over. The first is that we have a copy of the PowerPoint is in the handouts pane of the toolbar. So on your toolbar, you'll see there's a little section of handouts there, and a copy of the PowerPoint is there. You're more than welcome to look at the PowerPoint there if you'd like. You can download it. Of course, you'll be able to see it on your screen as Kayla goes through her presentation as well. A copy of the post test is in the handouts section of the toolbar as well. I just want to look, I'm getting a text. I just want to make sure you all can hear me. So, hey, oh, Shelly says there's no sound. So hang tight. Let me just make sure that you all can hear me or not. So hang on one second. Yep, we got folks saying, oh, now we say we can hear you. So let me see. All right, I need folks to tell me if you can hear me or not. Am I getting a thumbs up or thumbs down? Yes, I hear people say, I can hear you, I can hear you, I can hear you. That's great news. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for the feedback. I got lots of folks saying you can hear me, so thank you, I appreciate that. Just want to make sure that everybody can hear me. So let me start over. Okay, hang tight a second. I just want to make sure that I'm getting folks in the chat saying that everybody can hear me, okay? Can you hear me all right, Kayla? Uh-oh, I can't hear Kayla. Well, just when I think things are fine. Now Kayla can hear me? Okay, everybody's all right? Kayla can hear me? Kayla, I can't hear you. Will you? Oh, there we go. Okay. Yep. Now I can hear you fine. Thanks, everybody. Give me one more second. I just want to make sure everybody says they can hear me. Okay. I think we're good again. All right. Fabulous. Whew. Okay. Let's start over. Okay. A copy of the PowerPoint is in the handout section of the toolbar. So if you'd like to take a look at the PowerPoint, you're welcome to. You can also download it from there. It's also on our website under the webinar section on our website. So you can take a look at it there. And of course, Kayla will go through the PowerPoint on the screen. But if you need to get it, you can get it from the handouts section. Also in the handout section is a copy of the post test. You're more than welcome to look at that or to download it and look at it throughout the presentation. However, keep it in mind that this is for reference only. You must take the post test online and pass it online in order to get continuing education credit. And I'll go over that in just a second. You're welcome to submit questions in the question section of the toolbar. There are a lot of you online, and so we're not able to have you unmuted. So you're able to communicate via the questions pane in the toolbar. So feel free to submit questions there. I'll monitor those throughout the presentation, and then at the end of the presentation, we'll try to get through a few questions. If we're not able to get to all of them, Kayla will have her email at the end of the presentation, and you're welcome to email Kayla questions if we can't get to your question at the end of the presentation. When the webinar ends, there'll be an evaluation that will pop up automatically as the webinar ends. It only takes about 30 seconds to complete that. If you would just take that short period of time to fill out that evaluation, that would be really helpful to us. that's a continuing education requirement for us. It's completely anonymous, and it's a requirement that we have to gather that information and send it to the CE entities. So if you would just take a quick second to fill out that evaluation, give us some feedback about how the webinar went, that would be really helpful for us. And then about an hour after the webinar ends, you'll receive a separate email with a link to take the online post-test. Once you take that post-test and pass it, then a certificate of completion will automatically be downloaded to your computer. If you don't see it, look in your downloads file. Sometimes it will go there. So keep an eye out for that separate email, as I said, about an hour after we finish the webinar. That will come directly to you from GoToWebinar with a link to take the online post-test. All right, I think we're ready, Kayla. So I am going to go ahead and swap this over to you.
All right. Let me know when you see my screen.
I can see your screen. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera and my mic. And if you need me, you just holler.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for coming today. My name is Kayla Jessop. I'm a certified eating disorder registered dietitian and approved supervisor. I have a private practice here in Layton, Utah, where we primarily do individual nutrition counseling, meal support, supervision for individuals and groups who want to be certified in eating disorders. And then we have 4 different RO-DBT skills classes that we have a therapist be a part of that. So I have 1 adolescent and 3 adult skill classes. I was first introduced to Radically Open DBT about 3 years ago. I was the lead dietitian at Balance Eating Disorder Treatment Center in Manhattan, and that's where we first started the first skills class in New York City. So oddly enough, the therapist who was training me on RO left the treatment center, so it was kind of on my shoulders as the dietitian to implement RO into our PHP, IOP, and outpatient levels of care. And I really saw the effectiveness of RO with people who are struggling from eating disorders. So then I did the intensive training in RO, and that kind of leads me here today. If you guys are able to, if you can grab a piece of paper and a pen, we're going to be doing a short assessment on yourself pretty early on into the presentation. So let's get started. Radically Open DBT, or RO-DBT, is a evidence-based treatment, and it's specifically for disorders of overcontrol or for people who have excessive self-control. We are at a crossroads. We know that there's a significant portion of people who are failing to benefit from treatment, and this is due to chronicity, comorbidity, or pre-existing personality problems. We also know that 1 out of every 10 people in the community have a personality disorder, and overcontrolled personality disorders are the most common. We know that existing treatments are often not effective, for example, with depression, and most evidence-based therapies have been tested on non-chronic and non-comorbid populations, which is a pretty big problem for you and I, because I know when I'm seeing a client who is struggling with bulimia, they usually don't just have bulimia, right? They might have depression, anxiety, PTSD, OCD, etc. So what's great is that Radically Open DBT is a transdiagnostic treatment. All right, so here is a nice graph where you can start to see different types of personality disorders. And let me know if you guys can't see what I'm drawing on the screen. I hope you can. Basically, these antisocial, borderline, narcissistic, histrionic, these are considered under-controlled or UC temperaments. The rest, which is 73% of personality disorders, are considered over-controlled, or I'm going to refer to it today a lot as OC. We know that people who struggle with borderline personality disorder or who have a more under-controlled temperament, they're going to benefit from standard DBT. And now we know through research that over-controlled individuals are really going to have benefits, significant benefits from the treatment of radically open DBT. So too much of a good thing, the problem of over-control. So existing research kind of saw self-control as a linear construct. So again, under control, classic example is BPD. So historically, people thought, you know, the further away you can get from BPD, the more self-control you can have in your life, the increased psychological well-being you will have. However, through a lot more research, we have discovered that you can have too much of a good thing, meaning that we now know that psychological well-being is really more so on a bell-shaped curve. So people who are on either ends of the spectrum really are suffering. So on the high constraints, or people who have over-controlled temperaments, to give you an example of what this might look like, right here on the end is where autism lives. Then we have anorexia, OCPD, treatment-resistant anxiety, OCD, chronic depression, and the list kind of goes on until we get to a little bit more of a flexible range. So again, people who are on this side of the spectrum are going to most likely be benefiting from radically open DBT, whereas under controlled temperaments, treatment recommendation would be standard DBT. So please pull out that paper and pen. We are going to be doing an assessment on yourself. This is called the word pairs assessment. This is one of 4 assessments that we do during the intake process to determine if RO is appropriate or not. So what I'd like you to do on your paper is write column A on one side and column B on the other. On the next screen, there's going to be word pairs. And what I'd like you to do is put a tally mark under the word that you mostly identify with, that you feel best describes you. If you're really unsure between the 2 words of which one best describes you, I want you to imagine what your friends or your family members might say about you. If neither words describe you, just try to pick the one that's closest to describing you. So I'll give you about 3 minutes to do this. So really go with your gut, pick the word that you think really genuinely represents you better, and then we'll assess afterwards. So I'm just going to give you an example. If you feel like you have a more impulsive temperament, you are going to put a tally mark under column A. If you feel like you have a more deliberate temperament, you're going to put a tally mark under column B. Again, you can only pick one. Ready, set, go. I'll set my timer for 3 minutes. You have about 1 minute left. Okay, so I'm going to stay on this screen for a little bit longer, just in case some people are finishing up. So this is going to help us determine whether you lean UC or OC, remembering that one is not better than another, and you can't be both. So everyone's biotemperament is going to lean one way or another. This assessment specifically has an odd number of questions. So go ahead and tally up how many you have under column A and how many you have under column B. I'll stay on this slide a little bit longer. Maybe I'll share with you that most clinicians, which I'm imagining is most people who are on this webinar right now, have an overcontrol temperament, believe it or not. They say about 70 to 80% of us who are clinicians have overcontrol temperaments, including myself. And it makes sense, right? A lot of us went to quite a bit of schooling. We are able to delay gratification. We tend to be more organized, more conscientious. We tend to have more of a plan. So it makes sense that most clinicians lean over control. So if you have tallied up your score and you have a higher score in column A, this indicates you tend to be more under controlled. And if you have a higher score in column B, this indicates you tend to be more over controlled. And know that high scores on either subscale doesn't necessarily indicate maladaptive OC or UC. All right, so why do you think overcontrolled is often not recognized, or maybe perhaps this is the first time you're even hearing about overcontrolled temperaments? Well, if you think back to DBT, created in the 1990s, specifically for people who have more impulsive, chaotic temperaments, or under controlled temperament, those folks are going to be more in your face. They might tell you, hey, something's wrong with me. I need help. You need to help me. They're going to be a little bit more louder than an over-controlled temperament. Because over-controlled people, they're not roaming the streets in gangs. They're not causing riots. They're not yelling at each other from across the street. These are your hyper detail focused folks. They are perfectionists. They tend to see mistakes everywhere they go, and including in themselves. They also tend to work a lot harder than most, and this is usually to prevent future problems or perceived problems. And they want to do this without making a big deal out of it, right? They don't want the limelight. They don't want to really be recognized. They don't want to stand out in the crowd. They would rather pull the extra hours at work and do so quietly. Plus, they're really experts at not appearing deviant on the outside or in public. That's really important for you as clinicians to differentiate, because some of our OC folks, when they come to your individual session, they might act more like a UC temperament. They might be highly expressive, throwing a tantrum, screaming, crying in your session, but they're not going to be doing that at Walmart or Target. Therapy is considered a sanctioned, safe space, or like their bedroom. In their bedroom, in your office, those are safe areas where they can and often do express themselves, but when they're in public, they are not going to appear deviant. Okay, so one more thing, I guess, is that overcontrolled people are people who are taking us to the moon, people who are building bridges. They kind of give a damn about life. You know, these are the doers, the fixers. So it's oftentimes also pro-social. However, in extreme cases, they do come with 4 core deficits. So they tend to lack receptivity and openness. They dislike having novel situations where things are unpredictable, hashtag 2020, right? And they don't like receiving feedback because they tend to be more closed. They also lack flexible responding, so they have more of a compulsive need for structure or rigid responding. And they lack emotional expression or awareness. They tend to either have a very flat affect, more of a monotone voice, what we call dead eyes, or they could have some really disingenuous expressions, maybe some excessive head nodding and smiling while telling you they just got a divorce and then they set their house on fire, right? So it's not matching, which ultimately, both of those things really kicks them out of the tribe. So they are more aloof and distant in relationships. They lack social connectedness and intimacy, which ultimately leads these folks to having emotional loneliness, which RO-DBT specifically targets. As an RO provider, it is our job as a tribal ambassador to welcome these clients back into the tribe to help address the loneliness. A little bit of background about RO. It is informed by 20+ years of translational treatment development research by Thomas Lynch. There's 350+ patients who've received RO in research trials throughout the world, plus thousands clinically. And it's informed by dialectical philosophy, behavior therapy, mindfulness-based approaches, and Malimati Sufism. So it is a new evidence-based treatment, and really the emphasis is on the communicative functions of emotional expression. And what we're talking about here is social signaling. So we are teaching our clients how to socially signal, going back to those 2 examples I gave you of the flat versus the disingenuous, right? We're teaching our clients how to social signal appropriately so that they can rejoin the tribe. We also teach our clients about, well, actually, let me move on to the second bullet point, which is we're helping them promote or gain some social bonds, because we know that research shows that we are psychologically healthier if we have at least one close friend. If you ask your potential OC clients that you're suspecting about their friendships, they might say, hey, I have a ton of friends. But if you talk to them more about it, you might find out that a lot of their friends are quite superficial. They're on the surface. They often don't have one person in their life that they can connect to on a deeper level. In RO, we are also teaching our clients to skills to activate their neuro substrates linked to social safety. So what I'm talking about there is we're teaching them the autonomic nervous system and about the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system and how they can activate their ventral vagal complex, which will activate that social safety system. And that's incredibly important in RO because it then, once they're able to use those skills to activate their VVC, they're then more able to be more open in their environment. So what do you think, some of the key differences are between RO and other treatments? Well, RO doesn't consider anorexia the primary problem, or depression, or OCPD. Instead, RO posits social signaling deficits stemming from maladaptive overcontrol as the core issue. And this is based off of evidence showing that OC coping precedes the development of psychopathology. So what this is talking about is when I have a client in my office who I might ask, when do you think your eating disorder started? They might say, 16, 12, maybe 8 years old. What we know through evidence now is that maladaptive overcontrolled coping starts at the age of 4, 5, 6 years old. So it is something that is happening before the anorexia began. So that is why RO is going to be treating the overcontrolled coping. Another way to conceptualize this is that RO conceptualizes restrictive eating as a form of excessive self-control. So let's talk about the dialectic. We have under control or emotionally dysregulated and impulsive on the left. These are typical diagnoses that would fall under more of a UC temperament that, again, we now know would, benefit, whoa, guys, that's crazy, DBT, sorry about that. And I will say this is not black and white, right? So I have several clients currently who have bulimia who are in my RO-DBT skills class because they do have an overcontrolled temperament and they identify that way. So there's a large number actually of a large percentage, I should say, of people with bulimia who actually have an overcontrolled temperament. So it's not black and white, but for the most part, people who are emotionally constricted and risk averse are people who have OCPD, paranoid, avoidant, schizoid, anorexia, chronic depression, autism, treatment-resistant anxiety or OCD, and internalized disorders. Typically, if you have somebody with that type of a diagnosis, they are going to be benefiting from RO-DBT, which I think this graph is really nice and useful when you are giving treatment recommendations to clients so that you know what is appropriate for this client, because sending somebody with anorexia who does have an over-controlled temperament to, let's say, DBT skills class, that actually really reinforces a lot of what they're already good at. They're really good at regulating their emotions and many of the other skills that DBT treats, and RO is going to be teaching them a lot of opposite things than what DBT would teach them. So bio-temperament. Bio-temperament is the definition, I guess you'd say, is basically refers to the biological basis of emotions, of how we perceive the world and how we regulate our emotions, right? So researchers all across the world have come to the consensus that there are two primary bio-temperaments. And this is pretty exciting news, that this actually goes across cultures as well. So the first one is under-controlled. So they have high reward sensitivity, meaning if I were to give this pen to my UC coworker, they might respond like this. Oh my gosh, thank you so much. Wow, it's such a beautiful pen. Oh, I love you. You just made my whole week. Right? They're going to be really excited over something maybe pretty small. They also have global focused processing. So they tend to see the forest. They aren't super detail oriented. They don't see the trees very well. And they have low inhibitory control or low self-control. So if my UC coworker was coming to the staff meeting and I asked her to bring some donuts for everyone, she might have a 30-minute commute and have eaten half the box of donuts before she got to the meeting because she doesn't have as much maybe self-control. She just wanted it. It's more mood dependent, right? She wanted the donut, she was craving it, so she just went for it. So they tend to be less organized, less structured, less planful. They're not able to delay gratification as well. And a side note that BPD and antisocial PD, they also have high threat sensitivity too, meaning that they kind of perceive both punishment and pleasure at lower levels. All right, second bio-temperament is overcontrolled. So these folks, they have low reward sensitivity. So if I were to give this pen to my OC coworker, they would respond maybe like this. It's just a pen. They're not even going to understand why you gave them the pen, maybe. I mean, perhaps if they won the lottery, they might get a little excited. So it takes a lot to make these temperaments get amped up, basically. And they have high detail focused processing. So they do see the trees very well, and they usually miss the forest. So these are folks, when they walk into a room, they are going to notice if the picture frame is tilted, if there's dust on the desk, if there's grammatical errors in this presentation, if there's a book that's misaligned. They're going to pick up on those errors. And really, that oftentimes interferes with relationships, because they might ask their child, hey, you need to reload the dishwasher, because those cups that is not how we load the dishwasher, right? Or they might ask their spouse, hey, you got to refold those towels. That is not how we fold the towels. Okay, so it kind of, they tend to think that things are done, they should be done in a proper way. There's a right and wrong way to do things. And if everyone else should see that too, duh. So you can see how that would interfere with relationships. And because they're detail-oriented, they have tremendous anxiety, or they have high threat sensitivity. Again, can you imagine walking into a room and seeing all of the errors standing out to you? They are tremendously anxious on the inside, but they have that high inhibitory control, or high self-control. So they're able, for the most part, especially in public, to mask it. So you might not be able to tell that they are internally incredibly anxious, because on the outside, they could be giving you a poker face, right? So with all that said, if I had to pick a personality disorder for myself, I would pick BPD, because at least they have some fun in life, right? They have the high reward sensitivity. Doesn't take a lot to make them excited. But having an overcontrol temperament, there's not excitement. There's incredibly high anxiety, and most people don't know it because they are able to mask it. So I think it's important to show our OC folks some compassionate gravity, because they've oftentimes been struggling for a very long time. So bio-temperamental predispositions are really powerful because they impact perception and regulation at the sensory receptor, or pre-conscious level. So this is happening in their body between 4 to 7 milliseconds. And recall that 1 second equals 1,000 milliseconds. Before even conscious awareness is online, is there, their body is responding to all of those errors that they are seeing. And in extreme cases, they make overt behavioral responding more rigid and less adaptive to change. So, for example, an overcontrolled client is going to feel and appear uptight at work, at home, at the gym, and at the party. They don't know how to turn it off. Whereas you and me, sure, I'm imagining most of us lean OC who's on this webinar, but we most likely have fewer bio-temperamental biases, which means, yeah, sure, maybe we're stressed at work, but when we go home, we can turn it off and we can relax. Okay, so we're gonna watch a video. I'm sure some of you know about the marshmallow experiment. Basically, a researcher comes in, he's gonna give one marshmallow to 2 different children and say, hey, if you don't eat this marshmallow, by the time I come back into the room, I'm gonna give you another marshmallow. So I want you guys to think about which child is the OC child. Okay, so I'm sure you guys can all guess that the sweet girl right there is the overcontrolled temperament, right? The boy gobbled it up pretty fast. He kind of almost, he had a shame response after too. But the girl, she's like, she's a planner. She knows, hey, if I can just delay gratification a little bit longer, I am gonna get a second marshmallow. So we kind of, I conceptualize her as this budding, over-controlled child, very sweet, right? But as she blooms into a flower, if she has a family, a culture, an environment that is also over-controlled or values perfectionism, or that mistakes are not tolerable, or don't show vulnerability to other people, you only do that in your room. If you want to cry, then you go there. Then that's going to take that over-controlled budding child and potentially later in life, as she matures, develop into an eating disorder, develop into chronic depression, etc. So OC bio-temperamental predispositions make it more likely for OC clients to unintentionally bring perceptual and regulatory biases into social situations that function to isolate them from others. So remembering that this is happening on the pre-conscious awareness, right? This is where it's operating at. So these folks can't think or talk their way out of their rigidity, which is an assumption of traditional CBT. So these are the folks who don't get picked for school gatherings or sports. They tend to feel isolated and feel different than most people. At quite a young age, they're able to identify that they were other, that they weren't part of the tribe. So overcontrol is a problem of emotional loneliness. It's not a problem of emotional dysregulation. It's a problem of emotional loneliness secondary to low openness and social signaling deficits. They aren't very open to other people and their environments, plus they have social signaling deficits, which, you know, not necessarily a lack of social contact, but a lack of social connectedness. They might be going to the parties, let's say, but they go to the parties out of social obligation because they think that they should, not because they want to. When they go to parties or events, they might be around several people, right? But they're not feeling connected to other people. So how fast is 4 to 7 milliseconds again? Well, if you envision yourself running on a trail and you look down and there is a curvy object below your feet, your body is going to viscerally respond to that object before you even have the awareness or the thought, is that a snake or is that a stick? Our bodies do the same thing when there's looming objects or spiders. And what we now know through research is that our brain is hardwired to respond to facial expressions of other humans in the same way. So now we know why public speaking is usually in the top 5 or 10 most feared things to do in life, because all of our brains are hardwired. When we are looking out into a sea of people, our brain is hardwired to recognize and pick out the face that has the furrowed brows, that maybe looks mad at you, but perhaps they're just trying to concentrate on what the heck is RO-DBT. But to my body, if I were to be doing this live, my brain would pick out that person who might just need to go to the bathroom. But my brain is going to say, whoa, Kayla, you are kicked out of the tribe. Something's wrong. We need to address this, because in evolutionary times, you know, being a part of a tribe back then was crucial for our survival. If we were kicked out of the tribe when we were in the hunters and gatherer ages, that would have been pretty much a death sentence. So our bodies still respond the same way today, which is another reason why in RO we're focusing on social signaling. So what do? Well, in RO, we teach our clients how to activate their social safety system and turn off biotemperamentally heightened defense arousal by taking advantage of the neuroinhibitory relationship between the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. So we are teaching our clients how to change their physiology in order to activate that VVC, or that ventral vagal complex, to turn on their social safety system. Well, I'll say that RO is more of a body-mind approach. It is from the body up. We aren't going to be working on changing the client's thoughts and reframes and other things like that. We are going to be doing it from the body up. Plus, as RO providers and therapists, it's very important for us to activate our own social safety system, because when we're in a session with a client, or I'm running that RO skills class where I'm faced with a lot of clients with flat faces, it's incredibly important for us to deliberately employ gestures, postures, facial expressions, eyebrow wags, that universally signal openness, non-dominance, and friendly intentions. And we do this because we know through research that if I am employing these different gestures, my clients, through mirror neuron activation and micromimicry, can start to also activate their ventral vagal complex. So, what is radical openness? Well, RO is developing a passion for going opposite to where you are. RO is more than just awareness. It is actively seeking the things one wants to avoid or may find uncomfortable in order to learn. It involves purposeful self-inquiry and cultivating a willingness to be wrong with an intention to change if change is needed. So I'm going to take a minute here and talk about this skill, self-inquiry, because it is the core skill of RO. However, it's a little bit challenging to describe because this is a skill you actually have to do yourself. Both therapists, RO providers, and clients practice self-inquiry on a daily basis because you will not be able to intellectually just grasp this skill. So what you do is, there's several different ways, but for today's purposes with time, I'm going to teach you to do it through journaling. So we ask our clients, take out a journal, set a timer for 3 to 5 minutes. That's how long this skill lasts, and then you're done with it. And we start by asking ourselves the question, what brought me energy today? We use the word energy because it could be frustration, irritation, tension in my body, numbness. It could also be joy. If I felt joyful that my coworker tripped and fell, oh, well, that doesn't really align with my values. So maybe I'll do some self-inquiry on that. Because self-inquiry is a skill that will help me find what my personal unknown is, or what an edge is. So step 1. What brought me energy today? It's great to do things that are small, such as the car that cut me off on the freeway today. That brought me some energy, right? Doing this skill on kind of smaller moments that brought you energy is really effective. After you figure out the moment that you're going to zone in on, let's say the car that cut me off, we're going to try to locate your edge or your personal unknown. So our edge almost always pertains to an action, thought, feeling, image, sensation, or sensation associated with something we want to avoid, feel embarrassed about, and or don't want to think about or admit to. When we end our self-inquiry, we are coming up with a good question. We're not trying to find a good solution. We're not trying to fix the problem. We're trying to come up with a good question that I can learn about myself with. Because edges are kind of our personal unknown, or our shadow side, or our darker side, part of me that I don't like to admit to that I have. And sometimes I'll be suspicious of quick answers. When you are going through your 5-minute self-inquiry journaling exercise, if you come up with a quick answer at 2 minutes, you might want to be suspicious of that, because maybe you're telling yourself an old story. Maybe you don't want to touch that thing that's a part of you that is embarrassing, that is going to bring up some emotions. So again, clinicians and clients are really encouraged to practice this on a daily basis. So radical openness is not radical acceptance, because radical acceptance is letting go of fighting reality, and is the way to turn suffering that cannot be tolerated into pain that can be tolerated. Whereas radical openness challenges our perception of reality. A quote we say all the time in skills class is, we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. Here's the first lesson in our skills class. So it's called Flexible Mind Deaf, or Flexible Mind Definitely. So the first is to acknowledge unwanted, disconfirming, or novel feedback. So again, what brought me energy? Second step, use self-inquiry to turn towards the discomfort. Remember, OC clients, we're really good at automatically regulating ourselves, being in denial, practicing distraction or acceptance. But OC clients are not good at turning towards the discomfort. So that's where the skill is very useful. And then step number 3, flexibly respond with humility by doing what's needed in the moment to effectively adapt to changing circumstances in a manner that accounts for the needs of others. So importantly, RO does not mean approval, and sometimes being closed is what's needed in the moment. Importantly, RO enhances relationships because it models humility and a willingness to learn from what the world has to offer. Yet it can be painful because it often requires sacrificing firmly held convictions or self-constructs. A lot of times in my own self-inquiry practice, if I end with a question that I dislike, that means I did probably a pretty good job at the skill. So RO is experiential. It is not something, again, that you can just intellectually grasp. We are asking our clients to physically do things, to not just think about them. And so usually at this point in the presentation, I would ask all of you to unmute yourselves and to start your video. But I found out the other day that you guys can't do that. So instead, I am going to trust all of you that you are going to join my tribe. So everyone, please stand up and look at me. Start doing what I'm doing. We're going to start marching in place, and I want you to repeat after me. We're OC and we are proud. We're OC and we are proud. 'Cause we're efficient yet never loud. 'Cause we're efficient yet never loud. We're OC and that's okay. We're OC and that's okay. We see details in every way. We see details in every way. We're OC and we are tough. We're OC and we are tough. 'Cause we run around in the buff. 'Cause we run around in the buff. Give yourselves a hand. Great job, tribe. Usually at this point in skills class, we would just move on to the next part of the lesson. But for today, since I'm teaching you, that's what we call a PWP, or a participate without planning. It's one of our mindfulness skills that we just sprinkle in our skills class that you can imagine our OC clients just adore. But you can also probably imagine maybe the function of it to help our OC clients join into something that's spontaneous, to let go of their planning, to be more willing to potentially have an embarrassing moment. So radical openness is not easy because it is requiring a willingness to be wrong with an intention to change when change is needed. So you can no longer automatically assume that your perspective is correct. It requires taking responsibility for one's choices and responses to the world. So you can no longer simply blame others, fall apart, expect the world to change, or get down on yourself upon discovering a painful truth. So a little bit about the treatment structure. The primary treatment targets is to decrease behavioral overcontrol, aloofness, and emotional loneliness, while increasing flexibility, openness, and expression of emotion, which is ultimately going to lead them to become more socially connected. In an ideal world, RO would be, an RO client would have individual one-on-one RO therapy. They would also attend a skills class that ranges from 1.5 hours to 2.5 hours. My classes run 1.5 hours. They also do have an option to do phone consultation, but that's rarely used by OC folks. And then therapists and providers, it's recommended, and I do this myself, to join a consultation meeting. I highly recommend it as well if you do decide to get into RO, because it's where we get to practice radical openness. So again, that's an ideal case scenario. Most people in the state of Utah have not heard of RO, so most of my clients, all of my clients have individual therapists, but they are receiving RO through the skills class. As far as individual treatment target hierarchies, the bulk of your work in your one-on-one sessions is going to be targeting these themes that we use a diary card for. However, if you have life-threatening behaviors in your individual session, you are going to drop your agenda with the themes, and you're going to move and target the life-threatening behavior. This, I just want to point out that it's very important to note that overcontrolled clients absolutely have suicidal ideation. They have self-harm. It's not just an under-controlled impulsive thing. These behaviors are very planned out. And that's one way you can assess the difference. They're usually very planned. They know where, when, how they're going to do it. I had a client a month ago who even went to the store, who got the first aid kit before going home to self-harm. Again, that shows how planful these clients are about their self-harm. So it's important. We do address it through a whole protocol that I don't have time to get into today, but just know that that's not an impulsive behavior for these clients. This is very planned out. And then if you have a therapeutic alliance rupture in your session, then you're going to address that and drop your agenda with the themes. So this is when the client is feeling misunderstood or thinks therapy is irrelevant or the patient's not engaged. Know that therapeutic alliance ruptures are very important for our OC folks, because when conflict happens in their life, the solution is abandonment. The solution is, bye therapist, I'm not coming back to see you. So it's really great to have alliance ruptures in your sessions. And you're actually supposed to have multiple before session 14, because you want to rebuild and repair that relationship so that they understand conflict doesn't have to be a bad thing, right? As far as the orientation and commitment, I'm not going to get into this for time purposes, but just know that RO is very, has a lot of sequencing that is important to do when you're working on an individual basis. With skills class, what's the most important thing to know? That we stick to the manual. And here is a list of different skills that we teach. You guys learned flexible mind definitely today. You guys we did a little PWP, participate without planning. And we talked a little bit about activating our social safety system. Okay. So in summary, RO considers it essential to address OC bio-temperamental biases by changing physiology. Targets social isolation by teaching social signaling deficits, and encourage openness and self-inquiry in order to learn from an ever-changing world. So if you want more information, you can check out radicallyopen.net. Here's some more information about Thomas Lynch, the treatment developer. And this is the e-flyer that I show my clients that I suspect have an overcontrolled temperament that would benefit from a skills class. I'm imagining, I know when I first was introduced to RO, I was thinking of like that client and that client and that client. So this is a really helpful e-flyer I give to my clients, and I usually ask them to read this section. And they're like perfectionistic, rigid, unable to relax, lonely, shy, overly serious, masking inner feelings, unable to be spontaneous. They usually say, yes, that is me. Is there help for this? So they're usually pretty excited that there's something out there to help and target those. So I guess I'll turn the time back over to you. Let's see if I can do this.
Hi, Kayla.
You got it?
You did it. You did it. Great job. Nicely done. Let me get my stuff going here so I make sure. There we go. We have a ton of questions.
Okay.
And we won't get to all of them, but I know that your email address, as we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, is on the last slide. So folks, if we don't get to your question, you can email Kayla, and I'm sure she'd be happy to respond that way. So we'll just get to a couple of questions, and then I'll review a couple of housekeeping things at the end. So here's question number one. What about substance use disorders? Do they tend to be over or under controlled?
Oh, good question. That's hard because it's reminding me of bulimia, where what I've heard recently is that about 50 to 60% of people with bulimia also have an overcontrol temperament, whereas most people would envision them as having a UC temperament. So I don't know the answer to your question, but I'm guessing that there is a good percentage of folks with substance abuse who would also have an overcontrol temperament, but I don't know exactly the percentage on that. But giving them maybe some of the assessments would help you determine, help the client determine if they lean more over-controlled or under-controlled. So the client will be able to identify, and that's a really key part of treatment, is the client needs to identify as having an over-controlled temperament and that it's a problem. If those two things aren't there from the beginning, the treatment's not going to be very effective.
Great. Has this been linked with attachment disorders?
Gosh, I'm sorry, guys. I don't know the answer to that.
Sorry, I'm asking you questions you don't know the answer to.
But I know a lot of people who do know the answer to it, so I can connect you, if you give me their information, I can connect you to an RO supervisor who would know the answer to that.
Great, and that leads to the next question, which is, how do I find a therapist who has experience with RO-DBT?
So if you go to that website, radicallyopen.net, you can type in like different states. I don't know if this person's in the state of Utah, but right now I'm the only provider who does skills classes. There is a small chunk of therapists in south of Salt Lake who also are trained in RO, but I think they're a part of a treatment center and they don't accept like outside folks. I could be wrong, but yeah.
We have lots of folks from outside of Utah who are on the webinar today, so I think going to that website will be highly helpful for those folks.
Just click on the state. It'll give you a whole list of RO therapists.
Great. Okay, next question. Some people seem to be UC in the home, especially communicating / arguing with family, resistant to rules, but OC with people outside the family, very compliant, hesitant to speak up, anxious. Any insights or thoughts?
Yes, we call that emotional leakage. Emotional leakage is when a client almost has like a tantrum effect. An OC client has a tantrum to some extent, or it could be self-harm or suicidal ideation. But a lot of that emotional leakage is going to come out in the home where they know that other people cannot perceive them or seeing them do the emotional leakage besides their family or maybe their therapist. If emotional leakage happens in therapy as well. So that can definitely still be a part of an OC temperament.
Great. Last question, because we're running out of time. So last question is there any evidence that RO therapy can help prevent eating disorders later in life in children that exhibit extreme OC/UC personality?
Oh, good question. I don't know if they've done that research yet, but I'm imagining if they haven't yet, they will pretty soon, because quite a few of the higher up RO people do work with eating disorders. So I'm imagining they're pushing for that.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Kayla. That was fascinating. I learned a lot. I think we could probably do a whole day on all of it. Oh my God.
Yes.
That's
phenomenal. Thank you so much for having me.
Phenomenal information and just fascinating. And I can tell by the pages and pages of question that it's just something people were really, really interested in. So thank you so much for taking the time and for joining us at Center for Change today. Thank you everybody for being on our webinar today and for putting up with our audio issues at the beginning. I think we got that mostly resolved. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Two things. If you missed it at the beginning, just a reminder that as we close out the webinar today, you will have an evaluation that will pop up on your screen. If you'll just take about 30 seconds to fill out that evaluation, that's a continuing education requirement for us. It's completely anonymous, those questions. It just gives us some feedback, anonymous feedback about how we did on the webinar today. We send that information to the continuing education entities. So if you just take a quick minute to fill that out, that would be really helpful. And then about an hour from now, you will get a separate email from GoToWebinar with the link to take the online test. You must take the online test in order to receive continuing education credit. Once you take the test and pass it, online, then a certificate of completion will automatically be downloaded to your computer. If you don't see it, check your downloads files. Sometimes that gets hidden there, so take a look there and find your certificate of completion there. So keep an eye out for that email in about an hour. And then hopefully you can join us again next month for our next webinar. Thanks again for joining us today. Take good care and be well, everybody. Bye-bye.